The spring rain had fallen all through the night, striking the roof of Tenryu and tea house with the steady patience of a temple bell. At dawn, mist drifted above the moss garden like thin silk lifted by invisible hands, and Kato Ryosuke knelt alone in the tea room, polishing the black lacquered natsume that would hold the powdered green tea. His movements were measured, almost austere, one stroke of the cloth for each exhalation, the cloth folded and refolded so that no edge touched the lacquer twice. In another life, in another province, those same hands had wielded a katana. Now they whispered across utensils that weighed no more than a swallow's bones. Ryosuke wore his hair shorn short, an outward sign of having set aside the warrior's topknot, yet the shoulders beneath his plain brown kimono remained broad and tense, trained by years of drawing steel before thought could reach muscle. Villagers who visited Tenryu-an for tea glimpsed something unspoken in his stillness and called him the stoic tea master. They never dared mention the rumors that swirled through the region, that in his youth he had been Lord Kato's fiercest retainer, that his sword had ended countless lives during the Shonai Rebellion, that he had abandoned the battlefield after seeing a pavilion of wounded peasants burn around him like autumn sugarcane. He did not contradict them, and he did not confirm. He simply prepared tea in silence, measuring each day against the same simple credo. Steam rises, then fades. Today, I let bitterness dissolve on warm lips. Across the inland sea, the wandering poetess Ishikawa Yukiko was also awake early, nibbling on the last of her millet cakes while ferrying toward the Honshu coastline. Her straw hat hid eyes that had watched famines, festivals, and fleeting affairs. Her calligraphy kit rode in the crook of her elbow like a trusted sparrow. She traveled without retainers, without letters of introduction, armed only with a gift for coaxing melody from syllables and for listening to the wind between another person's sentences. Whenever someone asked why she wandered, she would offer a haiku rather than an explanation. Between two crickets, I place my foot, and the road moves on without me. Truth was, she was searching for pockets of stillness in a country that had grown louder with every market stall and every decree from Edo. The island provinces thrummed with commerce, but Yukiko believed the human spirit required intervals of unremarkable quiet. A rumor had reached her of a mountain tea house where the master brewed more than beverage. He brewed the possibility of repose. So she followed the rumor the way she followed all others, like a moth chasing lamplight under a crescent moon. 3 days later, just before dusk, Yukiko arrived at Tenryu-an, her sandals muddy from the mountain path. The air was cool enough for breath to show. Lanterns glowed along the engawa, and beeswax candles scented the entry hall. A young attendant bowed and led her to an antechamber where a scroll reading Yichi Yihui, one time, one meeting, hung at eye level. Yukiko smiled at the scroll's frank reminder that nothing repeats. When the fusuma slid open, the tea master appeared, smoothing the sleeves of a charcoal gray kimono. His face bore a faint scar along the jawline, but his eyes were calm pools behind which a storm once lived. Yukiko bowed. I am Ishikawa Yukiko, a poet from Mizunokuni. Thank you for receiving me without notice. Ryosuke returned the bow. All roads are without notice. Please, come sit. His voice was low, shaped like lava cooled into basalt. She felt an echo of discipline in each syllable. Inside the tea room, tatami smelled of rush grass. A single camellia floated in a celadon vase. Nothing more. Yukiko exhaled, grateful that no golden screen shouting of cranes intruded upon the silence. Ryosuke began teime, the formal tea preparation. He folded his fukusa with economical grace, wiping the tea scoop as though wiping loneliness from the world's brow. Yukiko watched, but not as a critic. Rather, she observed how small tremors of memory seemed to course under the surface of his restraint. When he raised the chawan for her to accept, steam curled like white minnows escaping a net. She took 3 careful sips, turning the bowl clockwise, as etiquette requested. The tea tasted forest bright, with a whisper of chestnut. It warmed her throat, spreading downward, easing joints that had stiffened from long travel. When the ritual concluded, Ryosuke bowed and said the most surprising words of the evening. "Your presence completes the tea. Will you honor Tenryuan by sharing one poem created in this room?" Yukiko felt a rush of blood beneath her ears. To compose on command was a samurai's test of swordsmanship in another realm. But she was, after all, a poet who thrived on momentary combustion. She closed her eyes. Mist kisses pine bark. A kettle's breath remembers the mountain's first snow. Ryosuke inclined his head, and Yukiko noticed a softening in his posture, as though some invisible weight slid from between his shoulder blades. "It is exquisite," he said. "If you would humor me, I should like to inscribe it and hang it in place of the camellia tomorrow." Tenryuan seldom receives verses that match its humility. "Humility," she replied, "is the easiest garment to misplace." Ryosuke almost smiled. The attendant returned and led Yukiko to a small guest room. Before excusing himself, Ryosuke offered her a fresh yukata, hot water for washing, and a final nod that hovered between gratitude and farewell. But the farewell was premature. That night, Yukiko woke to strained coughing in the corridor. Pale lamplight leaked beneath the shoji, and someone, a child, was wheezing as though a hand gripped his lungs. Yukiko rose and opened the door. A boy of no more than 12 knelt in a fit, his face flushed. She knelt beside him, rubbing small circles on his back. The boy stuttered, Mother is ill. Master Kato is boiling herbs, but won't let anyone close." Yukiko guided the boy's breathing until it found a rhythm. "Let's find your master," she said. They padded down the corridor toward the rear courtyard. There, under a slatted pergola, Ryosuke stoked an iron brazier. A clay pot steamed on its tripod. The tea room's restraint was gone. The samurai within him operated now, sleeves tied back, eyebrows knitted. The patient lay on a futon, the boy's mother, the inn's cook. Her cheeks burned scarlet, and sweat glazed her forehead. Ryosuke held a pestle, grinding dried mulberry and licorice. He looked at Yukiko with a flash of surprise, but said only, "She will not survive the night if her fever climbs another degree." Yukiko crouched, touched the woman's wrist, then her temple. A memory stirred of her late grandmother, who had been a healer in Tosa province. She inhaled deeply. "Do you have willow bark and yarrow?" He nodded toward a basket of herbs. Wordlessly, they worked, Yukiko measuring, Ryosuke mixing, the boy fanning the brazier. Occasionally, Ryosuke murmured instructions, but more often, they spoke with glances, trusting some shared instinct. Hours dissolved until the first rooster called. The cook's fever began to recede. Her breathing settled into skipped stones rather than tidal waves. At dawn, Yukiko brewed sencha for the boy, whose eyes threatened collapse. Ryosuke laid a cool cloth on the cook's brow, then straightened and bowed to Yukiko, deeper than he had bowled for lords long dead. "You knew what to do," he said. She shrugged one shoulder. "I watched my grandmother all my childhood. I was useless at stitching rice sacks, but I could read a pulse." Ryosuke poured water over his hands, scrubbing as if cleansing more than skin. "You saved her. We saved her. Perhaps you and I share an odd talent for coaxing steam to heal. He gave a single, rueful exhale. Too brief to be laughter, but near enough. Over the next week, Yukiko delayed her journey to help nurse the cook. She rinsed compresses in spring water, wrote poems to entertain the boy, and in quiet moments, drifted to the garden to refill her own vessel of composure. Ryosuke returned to tea duties, but found reasons to meet her at twilight, to discuss the subtle flavor differences between uji and sayama leaves, or to examine the poetry scroll she had penned in elegant grass script. One evening, while fireflies ringed the pond, Yukiko asked the question village gossip had not dared voice. Kato-san, what brings a warrior to trade steel for porcelain? Ryosuke placed a single stone lantern between them, as though adding weight to the question before shedding himself of it. When I was a samurai, my lord commanded us to put down a peasant insurrection. We won, as victors are measured by chronicles, but I rode past huts aflame and heard an infant crying inside. I dismounted, but another soldier had already swung his torch low. By the time I reached the hut, the crying had ceased. Wind fanned smoke outward, and I tasted, his voice faltered, I tasted roasted barley from the kitchen hearth mingled with something my tongue still refuses to name. That night, I sheathed my sword, placed it before my lord, and walked away. Yukiko listened, palms folded in her lap. She did not offer pity. Pity, she knew, curdles truth. Instead, she recited softly, "Silence after war. A cicada finds the shell of its former song." Ryosuke closed his eyes as though accepting an ointment on a wound that had never scabbed. "You give me a mirror," he said. "And you give me stillness," she said. "I travel to find such spaces." The next morning, word reached Tenryuan that a local daikon, tax officer, would arrive with escorts to collect levies on tea sales. Ryosuke's face tightened. He will demand more than we can pay. Last year, he almost seized the entire harvest. Yukiko saw the tension spread among attendants. An idea braided itself inside her. Poetry as diplomacy. She asked Ryosuke to place trust where swords once reigned. When the daikon arrived, silk robes embroidered with pine and crane, accompanied by 6 ashigaru. Ryosuke greeted him with customary bows, but Yukiko stepped forward with inkstone and paper. The official frowned at the poetess, who dared stand between him and revenue. "I am Ishikawa Yukiko," she announced. "I compose verses for provincial lords, for abbots, and for children who have lost their fathers to taxes. If you will indulge a poem before counting your coins, perhaps you will find the tea of Tenryu-an has flavored more than cups. It has flavored hearts." The daikon snorted. "Words do not fill treasuries." "No," she agreed, "but they may cleanse them of stain." Skepticism danced on his brow. "One poem, then." Yukiko folded onto her knees, steadying her mind like a feather on calm water. Then she spoke, bronze mirror tarnished, yet when autumn light enters, mountains bow within. Ryosuke held his breath. The daikon tilted his head. Poetry, the old weapon of court intrigues, still wielded a latent power. To shame without accusation, to praise without flattery. The official's eyes softened, whether from cadence or from its suggestion that his office, like a mirror, needed polishing. He cleared his throat. "Tea house master, I will assess this year's levy at last year's rate. However, you shall send me each month the first flush of your finest leaves, accompanied by one of the poetess's haiku." The ashigaru murmured. Ryosuke bowed, deeply relieved. Later that night, during a modest celebration with rice wine diluted by spring water, Ryosuke raised a cup toward Yukiko. "Your poem saved Tenryu on more effectively than any blade I have ever swung. Words, she said, tapping her cup to his, are lighter to carry than steel, but sometimes cut deeper. They drank. Moonlight silvered the garden. The world, for the length of candle flame, seemed balanced. Yet, equilibrium is a fleeting bird. 2 days later, bandits struck the road that wound around the mountain, stealing merchant caravans of tea bricks destined for Edo. Villagers whispered that Tenryu-an might be next. Ryosuke volunteered to lead a watch party. He wore no sword, only a staff cut from white oak. Yukiko asked to accompany him, notebook and sleeve. If violence erupts, he warned, words will not shield you. Then perhaps words can prevent violence, she answered. Night settled like ink spilled across the sky. By torchlight, the watch party patrolled the perimeter of the tea fields. Crickets rasped. Nothing else. Around third hour, a twig snapped. Bandits emerged, 4 men in patchwork armor, wielding short blades and desperation. Ryosuke stepped forward, staff leveled. His stance, once dormant, woke with quiet ferocity. No blood needs to stain these leaves, he said. The bandit leader spat. We stain them only because your master hoards silver, while we starve. Yukiko's voice slid between them. Tenryu-en hoards nothing, and if you take the tea, the daikon will double taxes on every farmer to compensate. Hunger will spread, starting with your own children. The leader hesitated. Moral calculus flickered behind his eyes. But hunger can override arithmetic. He lunged. The staff became an extension of Ryosuke's spine, whirling to deflect a blade, knocking it from the bandit's grip. Another bandit charged. Ryosuke swept his legs. It was combat reorganized as choreography. Force measured to disable, not kill. Witnessing it, Yukiko understood that renouncing violence did not erase skill. It redirected it. She shouted above the clash, "Listen, I will trade you something priceless for your departure, a poem born of this moment. Hear it, and if it does not feed you, take the tea." The bandits paused, curiosity tangled with caution. Yukiko inhaled, heart drumming. Midnight harvesters, steel glints like frost, yet sparrows sleep among green leaves. Silence choked the air. The leader's shoulders sagged, blade dipping. A third bandit muttered, "Sparrows," as though the single word pried open a locked chamber inside him. They retreated, collecting their wounded pride, and slipped into night. Ryosuke watched them vanish, staff still poised. Finally, he bowed to Yukiko, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the surge of history scraping bone. I once believed poetry soft. Tonight, it proved harder than iron. Hardness is not the same as harm, she replied. In the following weeks, Tenryu-an flourished. Word traveled that thieves avoided its trails, that a daikon quoted haiku while sipping the tea he taxed, that a stoic master and a wandering poetess were weaving strands of peace where once blades ruled. Villagers arrived seeking not just tea, but counsel. A farmer mourning his wife, a carpenter whose son longed to abandon trade for the stage, a merchant wrestling guilt for profits won too easily. Each found themselves seated inside the tea room, hearing water simmer, hearing words offered like balm on bruised hearts. Ryosuke and Yukiko developed an unspoken ritual. After each guest departed, they composed linked verse, Renga style, trading syllables as children trade shells by the shore. In those lines, their souls negotiated distance and proximity, fear and trust. On the first day of the plum rains, Yukiko prepared to resume her pilgrimage. She packed her brushes, folded travel clothes, and presented Ryosuke with a slim bundle wrapped in indigo cloth. He opened it to discover a new bamboo tea scoop carved by her own hand, its handle inscribed with kanji so tiny they resembled insect trails. Within empty hands, Galaxies pour. He traced the inscription with his fingertip, throat tight. I carved it from a stalk that leaned over the pond, she said. I thought it belonged in your ceremonies. Ryosuke set the scoop reverently on the tatami. And this is for you. He produced a small wooden case. Inside lay a sheaf of fine rice paper, each sheet bearing a single haiku, inked in his precise calligraphy, poems he had never shared with anyone. She recognized his handwriting, controlled yet alive, as though a river pressed through canyon walls. She read the first. Sword at rest, I learned steam's curved trajectory. Blood flows back to heart. Her eyes glistened. You wrote these? I did. You taught me I could wield language without fear of wounding it. They bowed simultaneously, laughter catching in their throats. Mingling with tears, neither tried to hide. The farewell tea ceremony took place under open sky. Rain paused as if in reverence. Ryosuke arranged utensils on a wooden deck overlooking the garden. Yukiko knelt opposite. When he whisked the tea, an emerald foam blossomed across the bowl. She sipped, tasting not just roasted notes of spring leaves, but also cedar smoke, unspoken forgiveness, and the hush before a temple bell. She returned the bowl, fingertips brushing his, longer than required. A sudden breeze carried plum blossoms from the path, petal snow swirling between them. Yukiko spoke her final poem for Tenryuan. Road folds like paper, yet the crease where tea was poured remains indigo. Ryosuke answered, voice low as thunder behind mountains. Cup emptied. I find your reflection in its curve. Moonlight after rain. Neither spoke further. The poems had completed conversation more fully than paragraphs. At the gate, the boy who had once coughed now stood robust, waving energetic farewells. The cook, fully recovered, pressed a parcel of rice cakes into Yukiko's hands. Attendants bowed, murmuring thanks. Beyond them, the path unfurled, wet and shining, disappearing into cedar groves. Yukiko adjusted her straw hat. Remember to breathe between whisk strokes, she teased. Remember to sleep between stanzas, Ryosuke countered. She laughed, turned, and began walking. The morning mist parted for her shape, then closed again. Ryosuke watched until only the faint imprint of sandal prints lingered on the damp earth. Back in the tea room, he replaced the camellia vase with the calligraphy of her first poem. He set the new tea scoop beside the hearth, its inscription facing outward, so guests could read galaxies while sipping. As evening fell, he composed another haiku, though no one would read it but the fireflies. Footsteps fade uphill. Kettle sings the note she left inside my stern heart. He folded the poem, tucking it into the sleeve of his kimono. Outside, frogs began their nocturne, and the tea house exhaled the day's final breath. Beyond the mountain, a poetess walked beneath a lantern of translucent moon, carrying within her the fragrance of matcha, the hush of disciplined motion, and a samurai's unspoken vow to heal rather than harm. And somewhere between them, in the space where steam meets sky, haiku floated like prayer beads, threading warrior to wanderer, silence to syllable, heart to open heart.